Old millionaire CEO hadn't touched a woman in 20 years, until his assistant made him feel again. But they called him untouchable. 20 years, not a single brush, not even a handshake. People said he was cold, some said broken. But all it took was one accident, one soft hand reaching to fix his tie, one moment of skin against skin, and the man who swore he could never be touched flinched like he'd been struck by lightning. He told her never to do it again. But his heart had already disobeyed. The man who built walls. It was a man in Manhattan who hadn't touched a woman in 20 years. Not by accident, not in passing, not once. Not a brush of hands, not a polite handshake, not even the clink of champagne flutes at a black tie gala. Henry Smith didn't do touch. People whispered that it was eccentricity. Billionaire behavior, power play, trauma. They weren't wrong. Every woman who walked the halls of Smith Enterprises knew the rule. The new assistant did not. Sophia Morris had been at the company for exactly 4 hours and 13 minutes when she broke it. It happened in the quiet before a meeting. A rush down the corridor, a navy blue tie draped over her arm, a nervous smile she'd been rehearsing since dawn. "I brought all the colors because I didn't know what you preferred," she said, voice too fast, eyes too wide. Henry didn't answer. He only extended his hand. And she, without knowing, reached forward and adjusted the knot herself. That's when it happened. The moment her fingers brushed the skin of his neck, his entire body recoiled. As if struck, as if burned. He stepped back, too fast, eyes wild, breathing uneven. "You touched me," he said. The words weren't angry. They were terrified. Sophia blinked, unsure whether to apologize or run. Your tie was wrong. I didn't mean. We'll ever do that again." The silence after that was so loud it hurt. In the halls of Smith Enterprises, Sophia quickly became the story. Not because of her resume or her smile, but because she was the only woman who had broken Henry Smith's rule and survived? "It's not personal," someone whispered over lunch. "He had a fiancée," someone else added. "Years ago. Left him at the altar. Left him hollow." The truth was more complicated. Her name had been Amelia Wright. Her smile had fooled the world, and Henry most of all. He'd been younger then, sharper around the edges, not yet dulled by betrayal. She'd said all the right things, worn all the right looks, and for a while he had believed her. Loved her. But Amelia hadn't loved him. It loved his wealth, his potential, his name. And when a better offer came along, more powerful, more prominent, she took it without hesitation. Left a note on the pillow of his penthouse bed. "You were never enough." Since then, Henry Smith hadn't let anyone close. Not emotionally, not physically. Especially not both. Sophia didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that her new boss hated being touched, and that she had accidentally done the one thing no one else dared. But she wasn't afraid of him. She didn't shrink. She didn't flatter. She didn't disappear behind apologies. Instead, she smiled the next morning, handed him his coffee, and said, "Don't worry, I brought gloves." To her surprise, he smirked. By the end of the week, something shifted. It wasn't obvious. It was quiet, private. I started noticing her. Noticing the way she chewed her pen when she was thinking. The way she organized reports by color, then by font. The way He didn't want to care, but he did. And the problem wasn't that she had touched him once. The problem was that, when she did, his skin didn't crawl. It remembered. One evening, he asked her to dinner. Business, he claimed. She wore a black dress, simple, elegant, not for him, of course, for herself. Because even if he was unreadable, even if he lived behind glass walls, something about the way he looked at her made her feel like a person again. Not an assistant, not a rule breaker, just seen. Over wine, she asked him the question no one had ever dared. "Why can't you be touched?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. And when he did, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with something softer, sadder. Because the last person who touched me didn't love me. She just knew how to pretend. Sophia didn't answer. She only reached forward. This time, she didn't touch his skin. She just covered his hand with hers over the table. He didn't flinch, but his breath hitched. Back at the office, he returned to his cold routines, deadlines, contracts, boardroom battles. But something had changed. When he passed her desk, his eyes lingered. When she laughed, he looked up. When another man leaned too close, he noticed. He told himself he wasn't jealous, that she didn't matter, that no assistant, no woman could break down the fortress he'd built for himself. But the truth was undeniable. Touch, and everything had begun to crack, and he was terrified. Not because she had broken the rule, but because without even trying she was breaking him. Chapter 1. The touch that shouldn't have happened. The office of Henry Smith was not made for warmth. It was carved out of cold steel and glass, perched high above Manhattan like a throne made of silence. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showcasing the city like a painting no one was allowed to touch. Not a single photo graced his desk, not a plant, not a splash of scoop. Just the clock, the screen, and the quiet hum of systems too expensive to break. Sophia Morris stood just inside the door, unsure if she had just made the worst mistake of her career or the most unforgettable impression. It was her second morning at Smith Enterprises. She'd been called into his office not by name, but by an urgent message from the executive secretary. We want the quarterly projections in hand. Don't email, don't delegate. Deliver them yourself, now. So she did. She stepped inside. And as she walked toward him, something shifted. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Henry looked up at her, like she was already a problem he needed to fix. Or maybe it was what happened next. The file slipped. She lunged to catch it. And when she reached forward, her fingers grazed the back of his hand. It was half a second, a whisper of skin on skin. But it was enough. Henry Smith recoiled as if struck. He stood so abruptly his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. His hand jerked back, his eyes sharp, unsettled. His entire body had tensed, like a man expecting a blow. Sophia's lips parted. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Upon, he said. Just that. One word, stiff and final. I was just trying to catch. I don't like being touched, he snapped. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sophia blinked, looking at her hand as if it were a weapon. Okay, she said, her voice soft. I didn't know. You should have, he muttered, returning to his desk like the conversation was already over. Sophia stood there a moment longer, stunned by the way he looked right past her, as if by breaking his rule, she had erased herself entirely. But she wasn't the type to stay invisible. That afternoon, she knocked again. Henry didn't look up. You're not on my calendar. I know, she said, but I'm not a ghost, and I'd rather not be treated like one. Now he looked up. There was something in his eyes, exhaustion maybe, or a barely masked annoyance. I didn't mean to touch you, Sophia said plainly. I didn't come here to challenge your rules or whatever system you've built for yourself, but it was a reflex, a human one. Silence. I've never had someone look at me like I was poison, she added. You're not poison, he replied quietly. You're a variable. She tilted her head. A variable? A variable is unpredictable. That's all. Sophia crossed her arms. Then maybe your model is broken. That almost got a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not quite amusement, but not coldness either. He set down his pen. Was there something else? She shook her head. No, just wanted to clear the air. He nodded once. Consider it cleared. But as she turned to go, his voice stopped her. Sophia. She glanced over her shoulder. His eyes met hers, steady but unreadable. Next time, just hand me the file. And she almost smiled. "I'll wear gloves," she said. And this time, when she left, the air didn't feel so sharp behind her. That night, Henry stayed long past the last assistant had gone. He sat in his office alone, lights dimmed, the city glittering like a dream too distant to touch. He stared at the same file Sophia had delivered, but none of the numbers made sense. His mind kept returning to one thing: how her fingers had felt against his hand. He hated that he could remember it, not because it disgusted him, but because it didn't. It had been 2 decades since a woman touched him without him recoiling in disgust. 2 decades since he allowed it. Not even a handshake, not a shoulder brush in a crowd, not even an accident. His body had learned not to want it. His mind had trained itself to refuse it. But she'd touched him, and it had felt like nothing he expected. And that scared him more than anything. Because if she was the exception, what did that mean for the life he'd built? The next morning, Sophia arrived with coffee. Not her usual nervous entrance. She was calm, grounded, unbothered. She placed the cup beside his desk. "Decaf, just in case you're losing sleep." Henry didn't look up. "That wasn't necessary." "I know," she said, but then again, neither was the flinch. He paused. And finally he looked up. She wasn't smirking. She wasn't apologizing. She was just there. Real, present. Sophia Morris wasn't afraid of him. And that, he realized, was her most dangerous quality. Chapter 2. The Man Who Forgot How to Feel. There were 2 kinds of men in Manhattan. The kind who chased power, and the kind who became it. Henry Smith had never needed to chase. He was power, distilled. At 32, he'd been the youngest CEO to take a tech firm public on the NYSE. At 39, he was already worth over $3 billion. Now, at 42, he could walk into a room and stop it cold without a word. He didn't yell, he didn't command attention, he simply entered, and people adjusted. But lately, he was the one adjusting. And he didn't like it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Henry stepped in alone, the usual air to hold the elevator. "Sophia?" She slipped inside just in time, cheeks flushed, carrying a stack of reports. Her hair was up. She wore navy today. Something about the color made her eyes stand out. Henry kept his hands at his sides. "Far away." She glanced at him, breath catching for a beat. "Morning." He nodded. "Ms. Morris?" And she raised an eyebrow. "So formal." He said nothing. The elevator began to descend. They stood in silence, the air charged with a tension neither dared name. Then, just before the 10th floor, the car jolted. Lights flickered. The motion stilled. Sophia's eyes widened. "Please tell me this thing isn't stuck." Henry pressed the emergency button, jaw tight. "Nothing." Sophia exhaled slowly. "Great. Just great." "I'll call maintenance," he muttered, pulling out his phone. No signal. She leaned against the mirrored wall. "I was joking yesterday," she said, breaking the silence. "About the gloves. You know that, right?" He didn't look at her. "Yes." "Okay, good, because I was starting to think you really believed I meant to violate some sacred protocol." He finally met her eyes. "It's not about protocol." "Then what is it?" Silence. She watched him for a beat, then softened. "Look, I don't need to know everything, but if you're this shaken by touch, maybe you should talk to someone." His gaze darkened. "I don't talk." "To anyone?" "People who don't understand." Her voice dropped. "Then make me understand." Henry stared at the closed elevator doors, like they held the answers he refused to give. But the words slipped out anyway. 16 years ago, someone told me I was never enough. I believed her. Sophia didn't speak. "I don't let people in anymore," he added, quieter. Sophia shifted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That sounds lonely." "It's safe." She looked at him for a long time. And when the elevator suddenly resumed its descent, neither of them breathed. When the doors opened at the lobby, Sophia stepped out without another word. Henry remained inside, as if the air outside the elevator had become harder to breathe. That night, Henry didn't go to the club, or the gym, or the office. He went home. The penthouse was cold, immaculate, a museum of discipline. No one had ever lived there but him. He poured a drink but didn't sip it, just held the glass and stared out at the lights of the city. The view was perfect. Central Park stretched below like a painting in still life, but it felt too clean, too distant. And his mind replayed her voice. That sounds lonely. And suddenly he hated that it was true. He didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., he sat at the piano in the corner of the room. He hadn't touched it in years. His mother had made him learn. Amelia had loved to hear him play. He'd stopped after she left. Now his fingers hovered over the keys, then curled away. No sound, just the tick of the clock. At 4:30, he rose and took a long, punishing shower. By 6, he was back in the office. By 8, Max Turner, his head of finance and oldest ally, found him brooding over a black coffee in the executive lounge. "You look like hell," Max said, easing into the seat across from him. Henry didn't respond. Max tilted his cup toward him. "Let me guess. Assistant drama?" Henry shot him a warning look. Max grinned. "Relax, everyone knows. Sophia Morris is the only woman to survive touching you without getting fired or frozen out. Half the company's taking bets on what happens next." Henry's jaw tightened. "There is no next." "Right," Max said, sipping. "Which is why you've been watching her like she's a malfunctioning server you can't debug." Henry didn't answer. Max leaned back. "You're not bulletproof, Henry. Just really, really well armored. Maybe it's time you asked why you need so much armor in the first place." Henry stood without another word and left the room. But the question stuck with him. Why did he need so much armor? And why did her presence, her voice, her gaze feel like the only thing that could break it? That afternoon, Sophia was in the hallway with a colleague, and she laughed at something. A real laugh. Henry heard it from his office, and before he could stop himself, he was at the window, looking down at the hallway below. She was leaning against a desk, flipping through notes, completely unaware that she was undoing him, one smile at a time. That night, he dreamed of Amelia for the first time in years. She wore white, the wedding dress, and she stood at the altar, smiling. Then, suddenly, she was gone. The dress collapsed into ash. And in her place, Sophia stood, looking not at him, but through him. Henry woke with his heart racing. He stared at the ceiling, trying to convince himself it was just a dream. But the ache in his chest said otherwise. Something was breaking, something long frozen, something dangerous. Chapter 3, When You Touched My Wrist. The quarterly strategy meeting was always a performance. The room smelled of polished mahogany and silent judgment. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline like a high-deck distraction, but no one ever looked. Not when Henry Smith was seated at the head of... Sophia sat 2 seats down from him. Not beside him, never beside him. That would be too close. She had learned that the hard way. The last time she'd been within arm's reach, she'd brushed his hand by accident. This time, she kept her fingers locked around a pen, her eyes fixed on the agenda. Henry didn't look at her, but he felt her there. And that was worse. Max presented first, something about European growth forecasts and projected EBITDA. Henry nodded along, even asked a question or two. But his mind drifted. It wasn't her voice. She hadn't spoken. It was just her. The quiet way she smoothed her skirt before standing. The pen she always clicked once before writing. The way her hair fell against her collar in a dark, accidental wave. And suddenly, Henry felt something he hadn't felt since his early 20s. Distracted. Sophia rose to speak when it was her turn. Just a routine note on policy compliance and scheduling. She didn't look at him directly, but halfway through, she lost her place. Her voice faltered, her fingers fumbled with the report in her hands. Henry's brow furrowed. He stood, quietly walked over, and held out his hand for the report. Without thinking, she placed it in his palm. But as she did, her fingers brushed his wrist. Skin against skin. A slow exhale left him, audible in the room's silence. Sophia froze. Henry didn't pull back. Not right away. But the moment passed, and his breath hitched. He closed the file, set it down, and turned to the rest of the room as if nothing had happened. "Let's move on," he said, voice clipped. No one spoke of it. But everyone noticed. After the meeting, the air in the hallway was thinner. Sophia was the first to speak. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, catching up to him near the executive wing. Henry didn't stop walking. "For what?" "Much touching you. Again." He paused, and then turned to face her. "I didn't tell you to apologize," he said. She blinked. "Then, what do you want me to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "You keep showing up?" "I work here," she replied. "That's not what I mean." He looked away, jaw tight. She studied him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she reached out. Not to hold him, not to provoke. Just a hand, gently resting against the inside of his wrist. Light, deliberate, kind. Henry's breath caught. It was the softest thing he'd felt in 2 decades. "Why does this scare you so much?" she whispered. He couldn't answer. She let go. "Because you're not scared of me," she said. "You're scared of what I make you feel." Then she walked away. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed in his office, the lights dimmed, staring at the skyline as thunder rolled over the city. For years, his world had been clean, controlled, void of the unpredictable. Then she touched his wrist, and something lit up in him that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a variable. She was the variable. And his system was collapsing. The next morning, she brought coffee again. "Peace offering," she said, placing it on the edge of his desk. "No touching included." He didn't look up. He didn't thank her. But later, when she wasn't looking, he drank the whole thing. And smiled. Just a little. Chapter 4. The dinner that wasn't about business. The reservation was at 7:00 p.m. sharp. He'd made it himself, called the owner directly, bypassing his usual assistant, bypassing protocol. He didn't tell anyone, not even Max, especially not Sophia. It was supposed to be business. To a dinner to discuss calendar restructuring and cross-departmental scheduling. He told himself it made sense. But when Sophia stepped out of the taxi in front of the restaurant, something in his chest shifted. She wore black. Not sleek or extravagant, just elegant. Simple straps, clean lines, a dress that wasn't trying to impress, and somehow did. Henry stood outside, hands in his pockets, watching her. "You're early," she said. "You're late." They both knew it was a lie. Inside, the restaurant hummed. Soft jazz murmured from somewhere overhead. Candlelight flickered against glassware. Waiters moved like ghosts. Henry had chosen a private table in the corner, dim, secluded. Sophia looked around as they sat. "So this is where billionaires eat when they want to look mysterious." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't approve?" "I approve," she said, picking up the menu. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "You can laugh." She looked at him then. Really looked. "You okay?" He paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look like a man trying to convince himself this is still a business dinner." He glanced down at his wine glass. "You're not easy to be around," she added, "but you are interesting." He didn't respond. Not right away. Then, "I didn't expect you to say yes." "Jidena." He nodded. She shrugged. You asked. I was curious. He met her gaze. About what? One kind of man invites his assistant to dinner after flinching at her touch. His throat tightened. I wanted to understand, she said. Understand what? Meal. The waiter arrived with wine. Sophia sipped first. You know, she said, swirling her glass, most people don't carry their trauma like a suit jacket. You wear yours like armor. Henry leaned back slightly. And you walk into fire like it won't burn. She smiled. Maybe I've been burned already. That silenced him. For a moment they said nothing. The candle between them flickered. Outside, rain tapped gently on the window panes. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. Would you always eat alone? Henry blinked. I don't. Entertain often. No family dinners? No dates? Okay. I not. He hesitated. Then, because every time someone gets close, they leave. She tilted her head. What makes you think I will? He looked at her for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. Dinner came and went perfectly plated, mostly untouched. It wasn't the food they were there for. It was the friction, the proximity, the silence that buzzed with unsaid things. And it all came to a head when she leaned forward and said, You're not scared of touch. He frowned. Excuse me. You're scared of feeling something when you do. He didn't answer. You flinch not because of disgust, Henry. You flinch because you think if it feels good, it'll hurt quick. He set down his fork. You know what? She continued, voice soft. You're probably right. Feeling something always comes with risk. She sat back. But not feeling anything, that's a different kind of pain. Outside, the rain had deepened. He walked her to the car. He didn't speak. She reached for the door handle, paused, then turned. Tell me something true, she said. He looked at her.
Her hair was damp, her dress clung just slightly from the rain, her eyes were clear and steady. And for the first time in a long time, Henry didn't reach for control. He just said it. I feel something when I'm near you, and I hate that I don't know what to do with it. Sophia didn't flinch. She leaned in, close enough to feel the tension pull taut between them. And then she kissed his cheek, light, unshaken, didn't move. When she pulled back, she whispered, Then don't do anything, just feel it. Then she got in the car, closed the door, and was gone. Henry stood there in the rain, hand against his cheek, as if trying to hold on to the imprint of her. The man who hadn't been touched in 20 years had just let her in, and he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to close the door again.
Chapter 5. The Kiss on the Rooftop. New York didn't do quiet nights. Even the wind had a sound, sharp, swirling through the corners of skyscrapers, like secrets that never quite settled. Above the glittering skyline, a rooftop gala bloomed. It was the kind of event Henry Smith typically dominated. Perfect lighting, calculated greetings, deals made with a glance and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Tonight, it wasn't the mergers that unsettled him. It was the moment Sophia Morris stepped off the elevator. Her dress was wine red, backless, elegant, unapologetic. She didn't look like someone trying to impress. She looked like someone who had finally stopped hiding. And Henry forgot how to breathe. He kept his distance at first, watched her from across the rooftop as guests floated between candlelit tables and live string music. She laughed, at ease, radiant. He hated how natural it was. And then Nathan Carter entered the picture. Tall, polished, smiling with the kind of charm that didn't need permission. He approached Sophia like he already knew her. And within minutes, Henry watched Nathan place a hand on the small of her back. The touch was subtle, casual, but it ignited something primal in him. Jealousy wasn't a feeling Henry Smith was familiar with. Until tonight. Before he knew it, he was striding across the rooftop. Sophia turned at the last second, catching the storm behind his eyes. "Henry?" she asked, surprised. "I need to speak with you." Nathan raised a brow. "We're in the middle of—" "It won't take long." Sophia narrowed her eyes, amused. "You okay, boss?" But there was something in Henry's stance, rigid, charged, that told her this wasn't about business. He didn't wait for her answer. He just took her hand and led her away. They ended up in a secluded corner of the rooftop, tucked behind a stone arch draped in ivy and soft lights. The hum of music dulled. Sophia yanked her hand back. "What the hell was that?" Henry turned to her, jaw clenched. "He was touching you." Her eyebrows lifted. "And?" "I didn't like it." She blinked. "Henry." Her voice was softer now. "Are you jealous?" "Oh. Then what are you?" He looked at her. Really looked. The wind tugged at her hair, the lights behind her catching in her eyes. And then, without thinking, without warning, he stepped forward and kissed her. The world didn't stop, but everything else did. It was not a tentative kiss. It was fierce, startling, full of years of restraint, shattering in a single breath. Sophia froze for only a heartbeat. Then she kissed him back. With both hands, she grabbed the lapels of his jacket, holding him like she'd wanted to since the day she'd accidentally touched his skin, and he looked at her like she was fire. And maybe she was, because Henry Smith had never burned like this before. He was the one to pull away first. Slowly, ragged breath, wide eyes. "This shouldn't have happened," he said, voice low. Sophia's hands dropped. "Why?" He stepped back. "It was a mistake." Her jaw tightened. "A mistake?" she echoed, her voice sharpening. He didn't answer. "You kissed me, Henry. You pulled me into it. Don't you dare walk it back." "I can't afford this," he said. "Not with you." She crossed her arms. "Can't afford or can't handle." He turned away. But she wasn't done. Scared again. That's all this is. Silence. When he didn't speak, she took a breath that trembled at the edges. "I'm not Amelia," she said softly. That name hit him like a slap. He turned back, eyes wide. "I don't lie to get close," Sophia continued. "I don't manipulate, and I don't leave." But he didn't say anything. Not a word. He just looked at her, like she'd touched the deepest scar inside him. And still, he said nothing. Sophia blinked back the sting in her eyes. "Okay," she said quietly. "If that's how this ends, then it ends." She turned, heels echoing against the stone. And this time, she was the one who didn't look back. Back inside the gala, people continued sipping champagne and speaking in careful tones. But Henry didn't rejoin the party. He stood beneath the arch where they'd kissed, breathing like he'd just sprinted a marathon. He touched his lips. Still warm. Still hers. And for the first time in years, he felt truly out of control. He had kissed her. He had meant it. And now he had no idea how to get her back. Chapter 6. The Girl Who Didn't Chase. The office was quieter the next morning. Not because of the weather, or the workload, or the unusually calm forecasts from finance. But because Sophia Morris had stopped smiling. She wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't even avoiding him. She was just gone, in all the ways that mattered. But she showed up on time. She delivered reports, answered calls, sorted schedules. But the light in her was folded up, tucked away where Henry couldn't reach it. She no longer teased him in the hallway. He no longer left coffee on his desk with sarcastic notes like, "Decaf, because clearly you don't need more tension." No glances, no smirks, no mistakes. Just silence. And it was driving him insane. Max noticed it first. The wire was twisted here, the wire is twisted there. In the executive lounge, sipping his espresso, he shot Henry a look. "You know she's not speaking to you, right?" Henry didn't glance up from his phone. "We're fine." Max scoffed. "You're so far from fine, you might as well be back in grad school wearing a fake wedding ring to keep girls away." Henry's eyes narrowed. "It worked, didn't it?" Helen poked her head around the door. "For a while," Max said, "until someone touched your wrist and scrambled your entire operating system." Henry set the phone down, fingers curling. "She kissed me." Max blinked. "She kissed you?" "Well, no," Henry admitted. "I kissed her." "Why, buddy?" Max leaned back. "And let me guess, you immediately called it a mistake." Henry didn't answer. Max shook his head. "And now she's giving you exactly what you deserve." Henry stood up abruptly. "I have a meeting." "No," Max called after him. "You have a woman who finally stopped waiting for you to catch up." At 2:00 p.m., Henry walked past the employee cafe. Sophia was inside, sitting with two team leads, laughing at something over a sandwich. The laugh didn't reach her eyes, but it reached his ears and it stabbed. He lingered by the door a moment too long. But she saw him, at his gaze, and looked away like he was nobody. He hated it. He hated that she wasn't chasing him, that she wasn't angry, that she was just done. That night, Henry didn't go to the gym, or the club, or the quiet solace of strategy decks. He went to a bar, not the kind he usually frequented. This one was warm, loud, messy. He sat in the far corner, untouched, staring, replaying every moment of that rooftop kiss in his head. He should have told her the truth. He should have said it mattered. He should have chased her. But he hadn't. And now she was slipping through his fingers. 2 hours in, the door swung open, and laughter followed. Sophia. She stepped in with Max and a few co-workers, casual, relaxed, effortless. She didn't see Henry. Not right away. She ordered a drink, took off her coat, and her laughter was real this time. And it hurt more than the silence. Because for the first time, Henry realized that she could live without him. She really could. When her eyes finally landed on him, her smile faded. For a second, just a breath, something flickered between them. Recognition, memory, that kiss. But then she turned away. Just like that, no wave, no words, just absence. 10 minutes later, Henry walked out into the cold. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't finish his drink. He just stood on the sidewalk and stared up at the Manhattan sky, throat tight. It built a fortress so tall no one could get in. But no one warned him what it would feel like when someone finally walked out. The next morning, he didn't show up at 7:00 sharp. Just 7:30. At 8:12, his elevator opened, and Sophia didn't look up from her screen. "Morning," he said, voice low. She nodded, not pausing her typing. "Can we talk?" he asked. "About work?" "But then no," she said. He hesitated, then walked away, but not back to his office. He stopped 2 paces from her desk. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the rooftop, for calling it a mistake." I looked at him then. Really looked. "You kissed me, Henry, and then you walk away." "I know. Do you know how hard it is to let yourself hope for something, only to have it ripped back the second you feel it?" He swallowed. "Yes." Her voice broke. "Then why did you do it?" "Because I'm terrified," he admitted. "I've spent my life building walls. I forgot how to open a door." And she stared at him. He kept going. "Well, I felt something that night, and I haven't stopped feeling it." Silent. "Then, what do you want from me?" He stepped closer, voice rough. I want you to look at me the way you did before I broke it. She held his gaze. Then earn it, and turned back to her screen. Chapter 7. The Mistake I Can't Undo. The knock came at 6:14 p.m. Henry looked up from the untouched report on his desk. He already knew who it was. Come in. The door creaked open, and there she stood, coat folded over one arm, eyes unreadable. I stayed late to finish the Q2 projections, she said, holding out a folder. Everything you need is inside. He didn't take it right away. Stay a minute. Sophia paused. Is this about work? No. She set the folder on his desk. Then I should go. Sophia? He stood. The distance between them felt bigger than it was. She didn't move. It took one cautious step forward. I've made a lot of mistakes, he said. Most of them I could bury, outthink, outbuild, outgrow. He watched him. But this one, his voice cracked. She didn't blink. You what? She asked quietly. He looked at her, jaw clenched like he was holding something back. You matter, he said finally. I tried to pretend you didn't, but you do. Sophia's shoulders didn't relax. You said I was a mistake. I lied. You kissed me, then took it back. I panicked. You pushed me away? I know. Her voice was low but steady. I was fallen, Henry, and you let me hit the ground. Silence. I'm not asking for an apology, she said. I'm not asking for clarity. I'm asking you to decide. I already have. Then show me. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he reached across the desk and placed his hand palm up. No words, no gestures. Just quiet invitation. Sophia stared at it. At the hand that had once pulled away from hers like she'd burned him. And at the man who had built his life around not needing anyone, and now couldn't even breathe right without her in the room. She stepped forward, laid her fingers in his. The moment their skin met, Henry closed his eyes like something inside him finally exhaled. No lightning strike. No panic. Just peace. And maybe a little hope. But peace was short-lived in Henry's world. Because the next morning, everything fell apart. It started with a photo. A flash on a gossip blog. Reclusive CEO Henry Smith seen holding hands with new assistant. There they were, clear as day, captured from a rooftop angle the night of the gala. The kiss hadn't been caught. But the look in his eyes had. By noon, the story was everywhere. By 3:00 p.m., the board had called an emergency meeting. By 4:00, Sophia was called to HR. Henry paced the length of his office, phone pressed to his ear. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She's not being investigated. I don't care about protocol. She doesn't deserve this. A pause. I don't want her reassigned. I want this shut down. Another pause. I said no. He hung up. When he turned around, Sophia was standing in the doorway. The face was unreadable. They're asking me to transfer to the Seattle office, she said. It's not optional, Henry. By hell it isn't. Sophia folded her arms. You think I want to leave? Then don't. A nod in Olivia's direction. They're protecting you, she said. You're the CEO. I'm just collateral. I won't let them do this. She stepped closer. Then you need to make a choice. I already did, he said. You? Then fight for me, she said, not just with words, with action. Henry looked at her and for the first time, truly saw what she needed. Not promises, not apologies, a decision. That evening, he made one. He walked into the boardroom without invitation. 10 directors turned to stare. Henry placed both hands on the table. I suppose you believe touch her position again, he said. I'll resign. Stunned silence. I won't run a company that punishes the people I care about, he continued. You hired me to lead. That means protecting what matters. He didn't wait for their response. He just turned and walked out, and never looked back. Back at the office, Sophia was at her desk, lacking. She didn't look up when he approached. I cleared you, he said. She paused. They what? No transfer, no inquiry, no more interference. She turned, confused. How? I threatened to walk. She blinked. You were going to resign? He nodded. I would have. Her voice dropped. Why? His reply was immediate. Because I'm not losing you again. He stepped closer. I pushed you away because I thought I was safer alone, he said. Because I didn't think I deserved to feel this. And now? She whispered. He reached out, brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers. Why, I can't imagine feeling anything else. She leaned into his touch, slow, deliberate. No rush. Just truth. And when he kissed her this time, it was quiet and steady and full of all the things he'd never let himself want. Chapter 8. The rain made it real. The rain came in quiet at first, like it wasn't sure it wanted to stay. It brushed the streets with hesitation, kissed the pavement without force. But by the time Sophia stepped out of the office and into the night, it had turned into a downpour. But she didn't run for cover. Actually, we walked into it. Coat unbuttoned, hair pulled loose, a woman too tired to pretend she didn't feel everything still echoing from the past week. She hadn't spoken to Henry since the boardroom battle. He had saved her job. He had chosen her. But he hadn't said the words. Not the real ones. Not the ones that mattered. She found him outside his building, leaning against the stone archway by the front steps. No umbrella, no coat. Just him, hands in his pockets, shirt slowly soaking through, face tilted toward the storm like it could wash away everything he hadn't said. Sophia stopped 2 feet from him. You're going to get sick, she said. He didn't move. I deserve it. She folded her arms. You're not a martyr. No, he said quietly. Just someone who takes too long to do the right thing. Rain dripped from his brow, his jaw. His voice cracked a little. You didn't deserve any of it, Sophia. The silence, the distance, that night on the rooftop. Don't, she said, her voice sharp. He looked at her, startled. She stepped closer, the rain flattening her hair against her cheeks. If you're about to tell me it was another mistake, I'm not. Her shoulders dropped. He took a breath. I'm here because I don't want to run anymore. Sophia's voice was soft now. Then say it. Why you've been too afraid to say. He stared at her. In the background, a horn honked somewhere far off. The city never slept, but right now it felt like it held its breath. I've never needed anyone, Henry said. Never wanted anyone near me. But you, his throat caught. You walked in and didn't try to fix me. You just saw me, and I think, he shook his head, the words heavy in his mouth. I think I've been waiting for you my whole damn life. Sophia blinked, rain mixing with something warmer on her cheeks. I love you, he said. I don't know what to do with it, but it's yours. Silence. She stepped into him, her hands resting lightly on his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't recoil. He didn't retreat. She looked up at him through wet lashes. Then don't do anything with it, Henry. Just let yourself feel it. His breath hitched. And when she kissed him this time, it wasn't defiant. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a mistake waiting to be undone. It was real. Softer. Certain. He kissed her back with everything he had. The rain soaked them both. A city disappeared. Later, inside his apartment, she wrapped herself in one of his shirts while he made tea, awkward and a little too slow, like someone who hadn't had another person in his kitchen in years. She sat on his couch, legs tucked under her, still damp, still processing. When he handed her the mug, she looked up at him and smiled. "You're really bad at tea," she said. He smirked. "I don't usually have company." "You do now." He sat beside her. Close enough that their knees touched. And this time, he didn't flinch. Not even once. Chapter 9. The Proposal in Corduroy. It started with whispers. "He's really doing it? In front of everyone?" By 10:01 IED, the entire lobby of Smith Enterprises had stopped. Phones lowered, coffee cups frozen mid-air, emails half-typed. All eyes on the elevator doors. Because Henry Smith was barefoot. And wearing a corduroy jacket. Sophia didn't know anything was happening until Max appeared at her desk. "You should come downstairs." She looked up. "Why?" "Because your boss has lost his mind." When she stepped off the elevator, the world stopped turning. But there he was, in front of everyone. Damp hair. No tie, shirt untucked, corduroy jacket hanging crooked off his broad shoulders. And in his hands, flowers. Little ones, slightly crushed, like he'd held them too tightly the whole ride down. The crowd parted around her as she walked toward him, heart hammering. He took a breath, then knelt. The billionaire CEO, who hadn't let a woman touch him in 20 years, dropped to one knee on a polished marble floor with the kind of honesty that made the world forget what pride ever was. "Oh, Sophia Morris," he said, voice clear, unshaking. "I built my life like a fortress. No doors, no windows, no risks. You were the crack in the wall," he said. "The one I hated, the one I feared, the one that let everything real come rushing in." The flowers trembled in his hand. "I never wanted to need anyone, and then you touched me, and I haven't been able to breathe right since." A soft gasp rolled through the crowd. "I love you," he said. "You taught me how." From his pocket, he pulled a small box. Inside, an engagement ring. Nothing flashy, just elegant, quiet, like her. He whispered, "Will you marry me?" Sophia stared at him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she laughed, and the entire lobby exhaled. "Of course I'll marry you, you idiot." Henry stood, relieved, soaked, breathless, and pulled her into the softest, deepest kiss of his life. Around them, the office exploded into applause. Max whistled. Somewhere in the back, someone cried. And for the first time in 20 years, Henry Smith didn't mind the world watching. Because for once, he wasn't alone. That night, she sat with him on the floor of his living room. No fancy clothes, no cameras, no pressure. Just them. She looked down at the ring on her finger, turned to him and said, "You really proposed in corduroy." He smiled. "You made me human. It felt right." She leaned into him, head on his shoulder. "You know what I think?" she murmured. "What?" "I think love was never the threat you thought it was." Henry closed his eyes, heart full. "I know." Chapter 10. The Rooftop Wedding. The rooftop had changed. The string lights were the same, so was the skyline. But tonight, it wasn't about a gala. There were no investors. No speeches, just a line of white chairs and a soft arch made of ivy and silver silk set against the same place they had kissed for the first time, one stormy night that changed everything. Henry stood under that arch, hands clasped in front of him, waiting. He wore no tie, no armor, just a tailored suit and the look of a man who had learned how to stay. Max stood beside him, adjusting his cufflinks, whispering, "You look like you're about to faint." "I might," Henry replied. "Breathe, man." "I am." Max smirked. "No, you're not." Then the music shifted. Soft, barely there. Every head turned, and she appeared. Sophia. She walked without hesitation, bouquet in hand, sunlight in her eyes. Her dress wasn't extravagant. It was silk, thin straps, simple, but on her, it was everything. Henry's breath caught in his throat. He didn't move. Couldn't. Until her hand found his. And then he remembered how to stand. The vows were quiet. There were no microphones. No stage theatrics. Just two people, face to face, surrounded by people who had waited, just like they had, for this moment to be real. Sophia went first. "I didn't come into your life to fix you," she said, "and I won't promise to protect you from pain. I'll stay, through every storm, every silence, every hard day. I'll stay." Henry's eyes burned. "I was afraid of touch," he said, voice rough, "until you. I was afraid of love, of losing control, of needing someone. Now, I'm only afraid of ever forgetting this." They didn't ask for rings, but just exchanged them. Softly, without fanfare. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Henry didn't move for a full second. Then he leaned in and kissed her like he'd waited all his life for this one moment to feel home. The rooftop exploded with quiet joy. Max threw his hands in the air. Finally! Someone from HR cried openly. Sophia laughed as Henry wrapped his arms around her and spun her once, clumsy and perfect. For once, he didn't care how it looked. That night, they sat on the edge of the rooftop, feet dangling over the stone ledge, watching the skyline blink like stars trying to keep up with the world below. "Remember when you said touch was dangerous?" she asked. "I was wrong," he whispered. "It wasn't the touch. It was the feeling?" He nodded. "To now." Henry looked at her, his wife. "But now, forever. I want to feel everything, the man who let himself feel. They say the heart is a muscle, that it gets stronger with use." But Henry Smith had spent most of his life trying not to use it. He built companies, he broke records, he walked through every boardroom with a stillness that said, "I don't need anyone." And for a long time, he didn't. Until a woman walked in and broke the only rule he'd never spoken out loud. And she touched him. Not just skin, not just a wrist or a hand. She touched the part of him that flinched when people got too close, the part that remembered every betrayal, every silence, every night he'd laid awake trying to convince himself he didn't care. Sophia didn't ask to be let in. She just showed up, again and again. And somewhere between coffee runs and quiet glances, between elevator rides and rooftop storms, she showed him something no one else ever had. That love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock on the door and wait to be let in. It simply arrives, quietly, persistently. And if you're lucky, it stays. People still ask them how it happened. How a man who hadn't touched a woman in 20 years found his forever in an assistant with a crooked smile and a stubborn heart. They expect drama, a twist. But the truth is simple. But he let himself feel. He let himself fall. And in the end, that made all the difference. If you've ever loved someone from behind your own walls, if you've ever pulled away, not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much, if you've ever flinched at something that might have saved you, then maybe you know what it's like to want love so badly and still not know how to accept it. This isn't just a story about a CEO who learned how to kiss again. It's a story about all of us. About how healing begins the moment we stop pretending we're fine, alone. About how it's never really too late to let someone in, even if your heart forgot how to open. Even if your hands forgot how to hold. Even if you've spent 20 years believing love wasn't for you. It is. It always has been. Who broke through your walls? Was it a friend, a stranger, someone you didn't expect? Or maybe you're still waiting. Either way, we'd love to hear. Share your story in the comment. We read every single one. Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that real love stories don't belong to just the movies. They belong to people like us. People who fall. People who stay. Forever.